Hi! Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. I'm really excited to be able to start a new adventure today with our first 5 chapters of Moon Called by Patricia Briggs. I hope that you guys are enjoying it just as much as I enjoy the series. Let me know down below if you've read it before, if you haven't read it before, and you're just discovering it, if you're liking it, what you think of it, everything like that down below. I would love to hear what your thoughts and feelings are at the beginning of our new set of books. Please forgive me in advance if you hear any traffic noises or anything else like that. I have my window open because it is boiling hot in here and I don't have any AC. So I have propped the window open just a little bit in the hopes of not sweating to death while I film this. So if you hear any noises, I'm really sorry, but I just can't do it. I can't sit in this heat without any kind of air coming in. So let's go ahead and get started with our class today. There is quite a bit to talk about, just as I'm sure you remember in our previous lessons. Whenever we have the start of our book, there's usually a lot to talk about. So let's go ahead and jump right in with our recap. I noticed with this book series that it's a little bit harder to do the recap, at least for the first 5 chapters. We'll see how it progresses. Just because we have so much information coming at us in between events that I had to really focus on, okay, what were the actual events versus what we learn about the people and the story that happens in between events. You don't realize that when you're reading it, but then when you're like, oh, well, what actually happened in these first 5 chapters? You have to think, okay, well, all the information that in between, you have to try and pull that out to understand exactly what actually happened as events in the story. Okay, so we start this series with Mercy in her garage. She's working away at a car. And we have Mac, who comes in looking to earn some money under the table since he can't officially get a job. And Mercy decides to bring him in and let him work even though it's under the table, and she normally wouldn't do that since she can tell that he's a werewolf. And then as Mercy allows him to work, she has him work the full day, has the weekend, goes to church. We learn a little bit about her during that time where it's not super big events that happen. And then she comes back and works with him again on Monday, where he comes back as she offered for him to do. And they work another day where Mercy at the end of the day, after she goes home, realizes that she wants to offer Mac a place to stay in her garage for the night instead of having him be out on the streets and worrying about him. So she decides to buy him a blanket, but she is missing her wallet and her purse, which is still at the shop. So she goes back to the shop only to discover that Mac is there with some unexpected visitors on both of their parts. She saves him from the 2 people that were there to capture him, and in the process of doing that, ends up killing the werewolf that was there. She calls Adam, and Adam calls the witch Elizaveta, and both of them end up showing up there at the garage to help clean up the dead wolf, though the human does get away and drives away, so he's not a problem there, but the werewolf does need to be cleaned up. So they come, and they also try to help Mac by Adam taking Mac home with him to his house in order to teach him his ways, be able to have it so he can control his wolf, since we discover that Mac is a new werewolf. And then that night, Adam's house is attacked, and Mac is unfortunately killed and left on Mercy's doorstep. Jesse has been kidnapped, and Mercy goes over to help, only to be able to save Adam. And Adam's really wounded, so she takes him to the Marok's pack in order to get help. And we are right there at the end where she arrives at the Marok's pack, talks to Bran about needing help, and we're kind of at that situation right there. We're going to see what happens if Adam survives, how they're going to get back Jesse if they do, that kind of stuff. So that is the first 5 chapters of our new adventure. Again, I would love to hear what you think, how you're feeling about everything. If you like it, don't like it, if you think it's like a very big difference from Dragonlance, if it's not, since that's what we just finished. Just any thoughts, feelings, questions, comments, concerns, anything you'd like to comment down below about this at all. I would love to hear everything in the comments. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about starting this story. Obviously, in our previous stories, we always talked about how an author starts their book. And it's been a while since we've been at book 1 of a series, since we had 2 books that were subsequent stories. So now we're all the way back to how does a author start the first book of their story, of their series. We're going to see how the subsequent starting of each story happens when we get into later books. But right now, this is the very first impression you get of Mercy Thompson and Patricia Briggs's writing of Mercy. So it's a very important thing to be able to catch the readers and make sure that the reader wants to actually know about your story. So we do have a little bit of a slower start, which is the same as we had with Dragonlance back when we started very book 1, Autumn Twilight, where they are all meeting at the inn of the last home, and we just see them finally meeting up together and meeting at the inn. Here we see Mercy at her garage. So we're not like dropped right into any like crazy storyline or anything like that, or any battles happening or anything like that. She's just working at her store. But we do get to keep our interest because we have mention of werewolves and skinwalkers, which we know that Mercy is a coyote skinwalker. And for things about the Fae, we hear these little tidbits about this world that then hooks us enough to then be interested once Mac enters the picture. So the first real thing that keeps us in this story is wanting to know about Mac. Mac is homeless, on the run. It seems like he's somebody who can't be paid normal means. He's got to be paid under the table. Mercy takes him in, and we are questioning, who is this person and what is this going to involve, especially when Mercy's telling you that he is a werewolf. So that's how Patricia is setting her scene and making it so we are interested at the beginning through the first chapter. Instead of dropping us into something crazy happening, she's letting us first learn a little bit about this world, be intrigued because the fact that the world that we are in is different than the world that we know in our own terms. So we want to find out, oh, what's all this about werewolves, and what is it about this werewolf that is homeless asking her for help and money when he's obviously a runaway of some kind. We also have it where she's starting off by establishing her main character, which we're going to talk a little bit more about Mercy being a main character and point of view in a little bit. But the way that she's starting off, Patricia Briggs is starting off her story, is really by defining a character instead of having a bunch of events that are happening at the beginning. So we keep our interest by the few little things that we get at the beginning that we just talked about, but then also really setting up the time to, who is this person that we are experiencing? Who is this main person that we are following and learning about? So we are interested in what's happening in the story through the little bits that we get from Mercy, and then we're really setting up our main character by who is this person that we are going to be following throughout the storyline, and giving her some more details. And it makes us interested as well because we want to learn who Mercy is already from the beginning based on the few little snippets that we get. And as we learn more about her, there's also more questions about her. So I feel like Patricia really decided to start off, instead of doing something crazy with the beginning of her opening, she decided to have it be a slower start, but to really build interest in our main character and a little bit of interest in our unknowns, the few little unknowns that she brings in right at the beginning. It is established there is going to be one main character because we are following Mercy, and again we'll get into point of view, but it is a first person point of view, so we do know that Mercy is supposed to be the main person and the main character that we are supposed to care about and be following through this book and later, more than likely, into the series. And we really set up at the beginning of this as a starting of a story, we really set up our reality. Patricia really sets up the fact that this is going to be an urban fantasy. This is going to be something that is in our world but is not our world. It's got these unique features, this magic element involved with having werewolves and vampires and all these other fae, skinwalkers, everything else that she introduces at the start of her story. She's really setting up, this is the reality that we are following, along with our characters that we need to be made important of. So the fact that Mercy is made important, we have several mentions of Adam. We see Adam quite a bit, so we actually interact with Adam. We interact with his daughter and some of the people in his pack. We have set up some kind of knowledge of Stefan, the vampire. We've made mention of Tony, who we saw, the detective, at the beginning. So we're really setting up our characters here, especially our main character, but also some secondary characters. We're setting up, our reality of what's actually this world is going to be, to make it interesting and to know what we're getting ourselves into. We really get to know and understand what's going to be happening in the story. So we understand that the events... Sorry, I have it in my notes here, and I'm like trying to think, okay, what exactly am I trying to formulate with that idea? We want to get to know the reality and get to know what's happening in the story, so that we're going to know how we're going to progress. Does that make sense? It made much clearer sense to me when I was writing it down on my notes, and now it's like I can't articulate it very well. So we are making sure that we can understand everything and have all the basic concepts that we are going to need to know to be able to understand what happens as we go along with the story. There we go. I think that's a much better way of explaining it, of getting my thoughts out there. So the fact that we're establishing the fae, the fact that we're establishing the werewolves, the fact that we're establishing who Adam is and what Adam's role is, and that kind of stuff is all important to be able to know and to have a basic concept of the reality and the world in order for us to be able to understand what happens throughout the books. Because without any knowledge of how anything works or who anybody is or all that kind of stuff is going to make it so we are unprepared to be able to read at later points and know what's happening and why it's happening. With our fantasy story, like Dragonlance, you don't really know what the world is and how it works until you're experiencing it. But because this is a story that is based in our world but is different, we have to establish what the differences are and what those kind of concepts are in order for us to be able to follow what's happening at a later point and to be able to progress through the story and follow along. Alright, any questions on that portion of starting the book? Go ahead and let me know so I can address that. But I think I got it better down there at the end. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of all-encompassing in the generalization of everything that is starting our story. We are basically trying to get us as a reader into the story and at a point that we can understand and move forward, and to be able to be interested enough without giving too much away at the beginning so we can get that setup and that ball rolling. So we understand a bit of Mercy, we understand a bit about werewolves, we understand a bit about the other magical creatures that are going to be featured in this story, get understanding of kind of the way the world works, so that way with our little bits of hints of, Mac and all these other things that are happening, we'll now be interested in continuing while still having enough knowledge to continue our storyline. The next important thing to go ahead and talk about is point of view. So we've established how we're starting off our story, and now we've got how we are viewing our story. And it's going to be very different from our Dragonlance story because that was third person omniscient. We have a bunch of different characters that we are looking at, but for this set of series we've only got one person we are looking from because it is a first person point of view, in specific from Mercy's point of view. So we're very up close, very personal with our character, our main character, the person that we're going to be following through all this book, and more than likely, some series they can do different characters from different points of view, but from more than likely from Mercy's point of view through all the books. So we are right up close and personal with her thoughts, her feelings, her decision making, her actual actions. Like, we are getting it all from her up close and personal, directly from her own brain. So it's very, very different from our backed up view from our last series of Dragonlance. So it's very, very different feel as well, because we have this different point of view and it's very much close, personal point of view. We're having a different feel to the reading of this book. At least I feel that it's a different feel. What do you guys think? We are much more casual, I feel like, with this narration. It's much more laid back, much more free-flowing kind of stuff. And that's probably also to do with her thoughts, because her thoughts are very ingrained in the reading of and the writing of this story. She goes from actions to thoughts, back to actions to thoughts. So we're really all-encompassing Mercy's experience to be what we're reading as our experience of the story. So we're a lot more laid back because Mercy seems to be a much more laid back person. We're very much casual because we are very close and casual with her. It's the way that she talks to us is the way that we experience the story. Kind of going back to the thoughts aspect, we've got our actions and the thoughts filling between the actions. So we have a lot more space in between our time. So it's not like with Dragonlance, we had it very, kind of action-based storyline. We had it where the action moved and progressed our storyline mostly. We did get thoughts and feelings from our characters every now and then, but it was mostly based off of having our characters' actions. And we had a lot of different characters to keep track of, so we had a lot of actions that moved us forward. For Mercy, we are progressed through the story from actions and from her thoughts. So the plot is moved forward not just by what she's doing, but also by what she's thinking, and that those thoughts processes fill the gap between action and the next action. So we've got a lot more happening in a smaller space of time that then altogether progresses us through the story, either by progressing the plot or by progressing our knowledge as a reader, or by, adding depth to the story or anything else. The thoughts are just as important, if not more important, than the actions, because that's how we're getting a lot of our information. Not just from the actions, but also from thoughts, feelings, emotions, as well as how she perceives the world and perceives the people around her. That affects how we see things and perceive stuff around her. Now, when I was in school for my creative writing bachelor degree, we talked a lot about biased narrators. I think it's kind of silly to talk about biased narrators. I mean, the only way you're going to experience anything is through a biased narrator. Even Dragonlance, which they would say would be the least biased narrator, if you're an all-knowing being that's just writing what's happening. I don't think that you cannot have an opinion on things and not have things look to you like, the way you think it looks, that kind of stuff. So I feel like kind of talking about a biased narrator is kind of silly. To have that be a concept that affects, or how you think should affect the novel, because that is the way that in that point of view you actually can keep secrets, which kind of goes on to my next thing I wanted to talk about with point of view, is that because you're so up close and personal with our character, the author has to manage a different way of presenting information in order to not just have everything out there. Because everything that the character knows, you have the possibility of knowing. But unless the character actually tells you those things, you can't know them. or how they are perceived by that character that tells you, okay, this is this, but really it's something else, and you find that out later. That's just as much of being that so close to that character, which is where we come into our bias topic. That bias is how we are able to keep secrets, to keep things in suspense, to mislead our readers as well as our characters. But I find that, for me personally, I love first-person novels. They're my very favorite point of view because it's like you're experiencing as a person. And I don't feel like that being biased as a narrator matters so much as the experience of being close to that person, of really knowing your character, of feeling so attached to that character, and to experience it more lifelike than anything else is really an amazing thing. Because with Dragonlance, it seems much more distant, and obviously you have a lot more characters, so that's why they have to do it that way, and you have to be able to love all the characters. But there is that bit where you know that if the author would just tell you, that you would know it all, and that would leave out the suspense. Obviously, it's good when your author makes it so you want to know those things and you want to progress because you know the narrator is not going to tell you. So it is really good to be able to keep your audience really engaged with these characters by being so distanced from them. That just shows how good Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman are at their writing. But to me, it's much more intimate to be so close to that character and experience life the way they experienced it. It really makes it a really bold connection between you and the main character. And some people I know do imagine themselves with first person as being the main character. I don't usually feel that way, but maybe because to me I always feel like the character is so separate from who I am that the first person doesn't make me transpose myself into the novel in that way. Plus, I just love Mercy too much to think of her as me. I just love her personality so much. But there is that aspect as well that many readers like, is because they can transpose themselves into the characters, especially when it comes to like things like romance novels and stuff like that. But it's just much more casual, much more laid back, much more up close and personal with our main character, and that's the kind of stuff that I really love. Let me know down below what your favorite point of view is, and if you like it better the third person, drew back more, lots of characters that you're revolved around, or if you like this more up close, personal, first person point of view. And we haven't read it yet, but there's also the third person limited where you are main one character that you follow along, but you're not quite as close to the character. Maybe that's your favorite. I would love to know it down below and to see why you like it so much, or what you think the benefits or not benefits are. As well as if you would like to talk about bias and biased narrators and how you feel about that, I'd love to hear that as well. Let's see if there's anything else that I missed. Oh yeah, with it being a first person point of view, we can get a lot of information out really quickly. We've got all the information that Mercy knows about this world because she lives in it, and she is giving that to us as quickly as possible. She's kind of throwing it at us as it comes up in her thoughts, and that's how we are going to be able to know what we need to know for the starting of our story, is because that we're so close to her that she just gives us all this information. She's like, okay, we've got the Fae on the reservations, we've got our werewolves, we've got me, who's a coyote shifter, we've got all this information on my background. This is why I go to church, all these different things. We can understand right away because Mercy explains it right away, and we don't have to be like, what's happening? What's going on? Because we are so far back away from everything that's going on. Let's see, what else? Kind of things that we already touched on. I didn't touch on as much as I wanted because it was mixed in with the biased conversation, is the part about keeping secrets. So the author has to be a little bit more creative with the way that they keep secrets from us as a reader, so that way we don't just know everything off the bat, because like we talked about, if Mercy knows it, she has the ability to tell us. But we see several times already in the first couple of chapters where she kind of cuts off, or somebody interrupts her thoughts, and we no longer get to know the train of thought she was going down to know everything. As well as if the character doesn't know, we don't know either. There's no outside view for us to get a look at what's happening. Like in Dragonlance, because we had such the wide viewpoint, we could see the enemy, or Kitiara, and her thoughts and what she was thinking and doing in relationship to watching our main characters. With Mercy, we can't do that, so the author can keep secrets by having stuff happening that the character doesn't know, and can then surprise the character as well as the reader as things happen. I feel like I covered everything that I wanted to with point of view. Let me just double check once more. Yep. So, I felt like I threw a lot of stuff just at you really fast. It's like my first person point of view. I'm just throwing it all at you. Again, let me know what you think about the point of view, how you like it compared to the third person from Dragonlance, or anything else you want to talk about with point of view. Let me know. I would love to have a discussion with you on your favorite point of view and why. And then let's go and move on to Mercy Thompson herself, or Mercedes as her full first name is. I think it is funny how they incorporate that joke at the very beginning with Mac, thinking it was funny that Mercedes was not a Mercedes mechanic. And obviously I'm sure she gets that a lot, as she had said that she does. It makes me wonder why the author, Patricia, decided to name Mercedes, where that name came from, and I'm sure that that was on purpose, that she made Mercedes not a Mercedes mechanic. But I just wonder what brought on deciding to name her main character Mercedes for being a mechanic, how she became a mechanic too. This is always things that really interest me, is how do the authors decide who their characters are, what prompts them to being that kind of character and that kind of name or whatever else. So let's go ahead and talk about her. I really want to lay down who Mercy is in this story during the first several chapters here, at least from what we've learned already, because again, we have a lot of information being thrown at us right at the very beginning. But it's important because, as we talked about, it's being first person. This is the person we're going to be following through all of these books. We're up close and personal and in her face and in her brain when we're reading these stories. So it's super, super, super important from an author to make it so the readers like the character they're following. I read specifically for characters and events and storyline too as well. But if I don't like the characters, I'm sorry. This story is not going to interest me if I don't care about the person that this stuff is happening to. I'm pretty sure that you guys feel the same way. Is if this character means nothing to you, why does anything that's happening mean anything to you, right? You want to be close and personal with somebody that you actually care about and want to know more about and don't want to have die. If your main character, you're just like, oh, this person's stupid, like, just kill them off. It's not going to be a good story or set of books for a whole series that you're going to want to follow and continue going with. So I really wanted to establish who Mercy is from the beginning, at least our perceptions of her so far, so that way we can also track how she changes, how we come to like her, how we come to know about her. And then later, like I said, we can track from she was here and now she's over here 3 books later, and how she got to being where she is as evolving as a character. So again, we get a lot of information about her from her real quick in our story here. Within the first 5 chapters, we've got quite a bit of information about her. And we've established her, of course, as the main character. So she lives in Findlay, Washington, which is by the Tri-Cities. She is very, very feisty with her personality. She's very stubborn, very determined, very defiant kind of person, which to me, I love women characters that are very feisty and defiant. I like all kind of characters, including men as well, that are defiant and stubborn, just like Harry Dresden as well. But I especially love it in women because, you know, women are always, in our culture, we kind of still hang on to that thought of like women being lower than men. But it really just shows the empowerment of a strong woman, and thinking how kick butt they are is just so cool to me. maybe that's different for you guys. Maybe that's not the kind of characters you like. Maybe anything else. But I really enjoy reading about strong women characters who just will take you and beat you up. And Mercy is definitely that kind of person who can just be sarcastic and up in your face, and there's just nothing you can do about it. You just gotta go along with it, because she's gonna not care about what you think or how you feel about anything at all. So she's a mechanic, and she owns her own shop, and she works mostly on German cars, which we established right at the very beginning, like we mentioned, with her being in her own shop when we first meet her. She's a skinwalker type of shifter, which she takes the form of a coyote, and she assumes that she gets that from her dad, Old Coyote, who she doesn't actually know who he is or what happened with him really when she was young. And she just assumes that that's how she got it from her dad, especially since her mom was the one that gave birth to a coyote and was very surprised even her mom didn't know that Mercy was going to be a coyote skinwalker. She's a faithful churchgoer, which I think is very interesting considering how stubborn she is in that kind of wanton way, I guess you could say, where she doesn't really care about what people think, but then she's a very faithful churchgoer who does have very hardcore values, which is amazing as well, to have somebody who really cares about being a good person and the other values that come with being a churchgoer and listening to church people. Though she was not a very big fan of her pastor, the person that was filling in for her original pastor, but that's okay. She treated them very nicely anyway. She has a set of foster parents who she lived with for her first 16 years, that she lived with when she was in the Marokes pack, Brand's pack, who raised her. Her mom brought her to the Marokes pack to be raised once she realized that she was a coyote. And then we don't really know much about her foster parents at this point. We just know that she lived with them. We don't really know anything else besides that, and a couple of mentions that she has of like lessons that she learned. And she knows personally her mom and sees her now and her stepdad fairly regularly, but she's not close enough with her family in the fact that she wants to be there all the time. She actually finds them exhausting after a while, which most people find their parents exhausting after a while, so that makes sense. Mercy also knows how to make her own bullets and owns guns, so she has a very complicated personality. She's just like, anybody in the world, is that she's very complex, has multiple sides, not just two, but multiple sides to her. Somebody who is very interesting in my opinion. She has these moments where she's very strong, very kick butt, but then she also has her moments of vulnerability, like when she goes to Adam's house after she realizes that something's wrong, and all she can think about is how she hopes that Jesse and Adam are okay. Well, then she goes in there and gun blazing and is ready to kick butt and not care about anything but saving the people that she cares about. So she's a very complex person, and this is just the beginning of touching on who Mercy really is. So it'll be interesting to see how we see her as we learn more about her, and then to see how she progresses through this book and through books in the future. Another really big part of starting a story, as we've talked about before, is world building. Because we are reading about stories that don't happen in our world as we know it, even though this story is in our world, it's not a world that we know it as we know it. We have to do world building in order for our readers and us as readers to know what the heck's happening and how the world works. So with this being an urban fantasy stationed in our world, we have the basic knowledge of the basics of how this world works. So we know about electricity. We know about cars. We know that there's gravity. We know basic science stuff. We know there's convenience stores down the corner. Like, we know the basic makeup of the world, the part of the world that exists that's the same as our world. We know all that. Versus a high fantasy, where it's a fantasy world that's made from scratch and we don't know how anything works in that story other than the basic commonalities between what humans normally have and what humans are as the basic rules of a world. I feel like I didn't do that very well. Like the fact that, people aren't, well, unless you specifically state otherwise, it's not always basically known. But if people are not floating in the air in this fantasy story that you created, we pretty much know that people walk on the ground and there's basic gravity at play in that world. That's what I'm trying to say, is that unless you state otherwise, things that we have basic things that are common between our world and the fantasy world, that's going to be assumed. But for this world, we have a lot of knowledge about, cultures and languages and technology and all that kind of stuff. We have the basic knowledge of. What we need to know now, and the part that's going to be the biggest for world building, is what we don't know. And what we don't know between different stories, because it has the same base of our world being the basis for our storyline, and for this world, the baseline is our world. Each urban fantasy can have different versions of what's different. So what we need to know is not only what is different and what is in this version of the world, but how those different aspects work. Because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, if you read one story that has werewolves, they have this particular rules or makeup, or this is how they work. It's for lack of a better term. This is how they work. Versus this other urban fantasy story that with werewolves, and that's a different way of how they work or how they come to be and what the rules are about them. So, Patricia Briggs really needs to establish with us as the readers what exists in this world and how does it exist in this world, and what are the rules that dictate how it works. We must learn how magic works in this world, because that's going to be different in all fantasy stories. Is if there is such a thing as magic, how does that work? Like we talked about before with Razlan being able to use magic, but then he forgets the spells and has to relearn them. There's no sign of that here with the witch Elizabeth. We don't even know how her spells work at this point. It doesn't seem like she was overly tired at the end. It looks like she didn't have to do any incantations as far as we could tell so far. So we already noticed that there are differences between one story that has magic in it and this story that also has magic in it. So it's really important for us to be able to understand and grasp the concepts that Patricia Briggs has in this world and how it works, so we will know as we read and the story progresses what the heck's happening and why it works that way. The main conduit so far, obviously as we progress, as always, things will be developed and possibly change, but so far we find that Mercy is the one that is, I don't want to say controlling the world building, but she's the main person that we're getting the world building from at this point. She's the one that has knowledge of how this world works, and she is conveying that knowledge to us. For example, with the way that she's sitting at church, and then she starts this thought process about the Fae and the reservations and all this other stuff. That is world building for us. Now we know, okay, the Fae are here, and they've got reservations that they live in, that kind of stuff. So her thoughts and her interactions with other characters that then bring on those thoughts are how we are building our world for the reader. As a reader, we listen to what she says, and we are understanding how the world works based on her understanding of the world at this point. You know, as we continue going through the story, I'm sure we will learn from other characters, and we'll have other devices of actually interacting with these elements that will help build our world up even more, and we will discuss those as they come up. But right now, at the very start of our story, the main character and our main conduit is the narration of our main character to portray to us the basics that we need to start this story before we get more into detailed world building. So far, we have a world that has werewolves that are unknown to the human population. We have skinwalkers, that Mercy is one of them, and that she's a coyote, and that skinwalkers are known to the human world, along with the Fae. Those are the two main ones that were revealed to the public. We have the Fae that are known to the public, and they live on 4 reservations, and the Grey Lords, whoever the Grey Lords are, we don't know. She hasn't explained to us who the Grey Lords are, other than some kind of leadership in the Fae world, forced certain Fae to reveal themselves. Though not all the Fae are revealed. They only have revealed certain ones, but the human world does know about the Fae and their existence, and created those reservations for them. We have witches. I'm pretty sure that they're unknown to the public because they mention how pretty much the Fae and the Skinwalkers are the only two that are really known. But they don't really go into detail about whether the witches are known to the public or not. When they talk about Elizaveta, they didn't actually go into whether the world publicly knew about witches or not. But I'm going to guess, because the werewolves are unknown and that they made a mention about only a few of the supernatural beings are known, that they're unknown. Same thing as we know that there's vampires, but we're not 100% sure. At least I'm not 100% sure at this point. Maybe you are. Maybe you can pinpoint, be like, oh, there it is in the text, that they are known to the public or not. My guess again is not, since she made that comment. We don't know much about how the Fae, the other skinwalkers that are not Mercy, the witches, or the vampires really work at this time. We have very limited knowledge, but we do know that this world contains all of these beings and what their status is, for the most part, with the human population. And now we're going to go on to our next topic, which is werewolves, which ties in with our world building. The reason I really want to get into a section of werewolves and how werewolves work and have it kind of established in our class here is not only because it's a very important part of our world building, but also because this is primarily a werewolf-based storyline. Yes, our main character is a coyote skinwalker, but werewolves are the biggest supernatural we're going to deal with in these stories. I feel like that we really need to pin down how these werewolves work in this story, and I'll have a basic understanding of the werewolves is very important. Obviously, you read it and you're like, oh, I already know, but I just want to go ahead and discuss it together as a class to make sure that we're all on the same page, make sure we all got all the same details, that kind of stuff. Because we are interacting so much with this race of beings, it is important to understand who they are and how they work, so then we can see how it progresses throughout the story, since we have such a high contact with this type of being. Just like in our last stories, once we had enough of a basic understanding of the elves, we talked about the elves or the gully doors or, you know, the knights, all that kind of stuff. This is a group of people that we already know a lot about and we're going to have a lot of contact with throughout the story, so it's good for us to talk about it, be on the same page. Especially like we mentioned before, with other stories, the werewolves will work differently. So it's important to pin down exactly how it works in this story for us to be able to follow along with what happens later in our story and in the series. Okay, so they have packs. The very basic thing is we've established is that there are packs. Those packs are all led by one main werewolf called Bran, and he labels himself as the Murok, and the Murok has his own pack. We don't know much about his pack at this point, other than that Mercy lived in his pack for a while, and that's about it at this point. And that they live in Montana. That's about it. To become a werewolf, you have to be almost killed by a werewolf. Not just bitten, but grievously mauled almost to the point of death in order to be turned into a werewolf. Obviously, then you have to survive the change. It's not just automatic that you will become one. You could die instead of becoming one. But if you just get bit, and then the werewolf walks away, you're not going to turn. You're just going to have a big bite on wherever you're bitten. Rogues who are out of control are killed. So those that are not in a pack and cannot control them, or they could possibly be in a pack as well, but they go nuts and can't control their werewolf side, are killed because they're a danger to themselves, they're a danger to their pack, and they're a danger to being discovered by humans at this point. Werewolves keep an eye out for possible other werewolves that could be in the area by watching the news, seeing if there's anything that seems suspicious or some kind of wolf attack or anything else. All the werewolves keep an eye out to make sure that if there is a new wolf, that they can find them, train them, make sure that they're not going to go on a killing spree or change a whole bunch of humans by almost killing them and forcing them through the change. Some people do decide to become werewolves, which they showed a little bit of so far with Bran's pack, Bran is doing their first hunt of the new werewolves who are just turned and who decided they wanted to be werewolves. No drugs are supposed to work on werewolves. This is one of the allures we get at the beginning here, because we have discovered that somebody is trying to drug werewolves when drugs normally don't work on werewolves. And apparently they are working, according to Mac. They heal very, very fast. That is a common trait of a lot of different werewolf stories. That is also the same in this one. They take longer to change. It's not an instant shift like Mercy talks about her own shift, is she can just go right into being a coyote. That can take up to 15 minutes in order to change into the werewolf form, or from a werewolf form to a human form. And it hurts. It's not something that's just easily changed and you start running or whatever else. It hurts, and you don't even want somebody to touch you for a while after you've changed. Werewolves are made for fighting. They're actually built obviously as a wolf, and wolves are more of I wouldn't want to say aggressive animals, because that's not necessarily true, but werewolves in particular are bulked up. They're made to fight each other. Women can't have children if you're a werewolf, not because you can't get pregnant, but because the change every month is, you can't ignore the call of the change every month, and the change is too harsh on the body for a woman to keep a baby. Obviously, we just already talked about the Marok, and he is the leader of all of the U.S. wolves. So he only rules over the elves that live in the United States. He does not have any control over any werewolves that might live in other countries or other places of the world. And the way that packs work in this story is all based on dominance, and they all answer to an alpha, which is a very common trait as well, considering that werewolves do come from wolves, who usually are pack-based creatures that have an alpha that they listen to. And that's the same in this story. They have an alpha, and there are different types of levels of dominance based on their personality, and that's how you get your level and your ranking in the pack, is based on how dominant and assertive you are. Women, on the other hand, do not have any pack standing unless they are mated. Women are all considered the lowest, no matter how dominant they are, unless they are mated to a wolf, and then get that status as, once they're mated, whoever their mate is, they get their status in the pack from them. So, pretty interesting, at least I think. Again, there's several common traits that a lot of different werewolf stories has, and then there's some different ones, some that are unique to Patricia Briggs' story that she came up with herself. And I always think it's really interesting to compare and contrast and see how those changes affect the world that our characters live in, and how they have to interact with that world based on the change, the differences, the variations of how the same kind of creature works. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry guys, it is freaking hot in here. Alright, last but not least, we're almost to the end for our first section here. Our nitty gritty, as always, the stuff that we talk about, think about, keep in mind as we go forward, the very particulars. The first thing is kind of just a fun thing, and I think it's awesome that Stefan, the vampire, that we have not met at this point yet, we just had him mentioned, and his mystery machine mentioned, but the fact that he has a mystery machine and his love of Scooby-Doo is just awesome. Makes me already interested as a reader in his character, just because I love Scooby-Doo, and I think that it's amazing that a vampire owns a mystery machine, and that Mercy is fixing that mystery machine is just so good. So good. Anyway, moving on to some more serious nitty-gritty things. Let's keep in mind that so far we have found out that all the women in Bran's pack do not like Mercy, and we don't know why. It's very interesting that all of them, even though there's not as many women werewolves as there are men werewolves, but why would all of them women in Bran's pack dislike Mercy? It seems really interesting, especially since that's where she grew up. You would think that she would have more family ties to these wolves. So we're gonna see where that brings us, where that's going, why that is as we move forward. Let's just keep that in mind, especially since she's right now in the middle of Bran's pack and surrounded by these women who don't like her. And it doesn't even seem like it's just the werewolves, because we have run in with a few humans, and they don't. The human women don't seem to like her either. So we'll see where that goes. And then another thing that's kind of funny, but also just I feel like is a really great point out to Mercy's personality, is she's driving this dangerous wounded alpha in the back of her car, and she has to drive several hours to get to the Marok's pack. And she's, had this experience where like this dead boy was dropped off on her at her house, and his whole thing is destroyed, and Jesse's been kidnapped, and she's sitting on the phone calling, making arrangements to feed her cat, and calling to get coverage for her garage shop. Like, that, I think you will find is going to be Mercy to the T. Like, you're like, how are you even at this point worried about such things that could be considered so mundane? And you're just like so casual, like, oh yeah, I'm just meaning to go to town, can you watch my cat for me? Obviously it's good that she didn't forget her cat, because she wouldn't want her cat to starve. And it's good that she's getting coverage for her shop, because then it's less likely to be noticed that she's not open, that kind of stuff. So it is smart, but at the same time it's like, how do you think about these things at these moments? Same thing with like her and her Adam's rivalry. I think that's hilarious, and the fact that she specifically dumps her spare parts car right in front of his view just to tick him off, and she will make it even more unsightly when Adam makes her upset. I just think that that's such greatness in her personality and the epitome of who Mercy is. Let me know what you think about all that down below, and how you think about Mercy's snarkiness and all that. Alright, so that is the end for today's class, our very first 5 chapters of our new story. Again, let me know how you're liking it. If you've read it before, let me know your thoughts, feelings, any comments, questions, concerns about anything we talked about, or anything that's happened so far in the first 5 chapters. I would love to have a conversation with you, even if it's just to, compare this book with our last series of Dragonlance and anything. I would love to talk about anything at all, and just to be able to learn from you as you are hopefully learning from me. And if you're not learning from me, please let me know so I can figure out how to have better classes so we can all learn together and analyze these stories better together. Alright, so let me know down below, or you're welcome to contact me also at my Twitter at fantasyfiction1. I would love to have a conversation with you at any time about anything fantasy related. Oh, anything that you would like to talk about in future episodes, any character analyses that you would like in the future, any writing ones in the future. Of course, you're always welcome to make requests as well. Alright, for our next class on our Mercy Mooncalled. Nice talking, Amy. You make complete sentences here. Chapters 6 through 10 are the next set, and it's going to be chapters 85 through 183. Again, that's quite a few, it's almost 100 pages. I know that's quite a bit more than we had in our previous classes with Dragonlance, but I do feel like this is a quicker read. I don't know if you feel that way as well, but I feel like it's a quicker read to go through the chapters. So that's why I am just doing it more based on the chapter amount than the page length. All right, I guess I will see you next time, and I hope you enjoyed this class. Bye!